Mark's the one who probably does it first in Mark 12, verse 26. Verse 26. As for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? So what's the reasoning, right? What's the argument he's making? He says, as for the resurrection of the dead, and then he says, haven't you read the burning bush passage? And what's cool there is the point he's making is that when God introduces himself, he doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham. He says, I am the God of Abraham. I was the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God still today of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. And the argument he's making is that there is a resurrection from the dead. That is, you don't die and cease to be forever because God is still the God of Abraham, because Abraham still is, never ceased to be. So this is cool little, this resurrection motif that we will rise from the dead. And they use this burning bush passage, which seems like nothing to us, Christians on this side of Christ. And it's quoted again and again in Luke and in Matthew as well. This idea of God being present tense, the God of Abraham. God still today is the God of your loved one who's passed on in the same way and even a fuller extent that he was the God of them while they were here. There is no moment that you cease to be. You rise the moment that you die in a real sense. Okay, it's also interesting in verse 6 back in Exodus, it's also interesting that it says Moses hid his face for he was afraid to look at God. This is before God says, if you look at me, you'll die. We don't have those promises yet. But already here and with Jacob wrestling as well, we have this reality of the fear of seeing God. Moses hid himself from God. So we have again Moses' humility, right? You think about the man atop the mountain in Luke's gospel who looks up to the heavens, and the man at the bottom who won't even look at God because he knows he's a sinner, places himself humbly in front of God. And we see Moses here sort of doing the same thing. In verse 7, we have a reminder of what we looked at last week a little bit, or 2 weeks ago actually. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I've come down to deliver them. So, right, there's a sense in which God has known that he was going to set the people free in this way from the foundation of the world. But the way the story presents it to us is that God is responding to the calls of the people, right? The people call out, and that's what causes God to act. You may think sometimes, well, why should I even pray if God knows what's going to happen, right? I think that sometimes. Why should I pray if God knows what's going to happen? Well, your prayers are very often the way that God makes it happen. So there's a real sense, a biblical sense in which if you don't pray, it won't happen. So the Israel crying out, this is repeated 3 times here, at least 3, where it says Israel calls out, God hears them and responds to their calls. So you can say narratively in the storyline that the reason that God saves the people is because they called out to God. That would be a true statement based on the story. The reason God comes to save is because the people cried out. God says in verse 7, I have heard their cries, I have come to deliver them. There is no contradiction in the Bible to God being sovereign and you being, you having the ability to change things when you call out to God. That is the way the Bible speaks of those things. Also, verse 9 says, now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. It's just a side note, but it's interesting that God is against oppression, right? That he sees oppression as a bad thing, which we take for granted now. But again, every other God besides the Christian God has been a God who loved oppression, who was all about slavery and forcing these humans to do his bidding and all those things. And all of a sudden we have a God, very different than all other gods, who sees oppression as itself evil. All right, more to the key thing here, to the key theme of the section. Verse 11. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Remember we looked a few weeks ago at young Moses versus old Moses, and how young Moses literally thought he was going to be the savior of Israel. He was the one God was going to use. He was about 40 years old. He was He had the power of Egypt, and he was the people of Israel. He was very educated. He was smart. He was strong. It made sense that God would use him. He thought God was going to use him, and then God didn't use him. And now we have old Moses, who is asking a question that young Moses never would have asked. Who am I that you should send me? Right? We're literally told in the New Testament that young Moses thought God's going to send me. Old Moses says, who am I that you should send me? So we see the humility in this person that God is now going to use. That humility is a prerequisite to being used by God here with Moses' story. Okay, verse 11 again. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Okay, pause. This is an interesting moment to look at our own current culture. Okay, who am I that I should be called to do this? How do we respond modernly, not necessarily you, but how does our modern culture, even the modern church, respond to someone who doubts their ability to do something? Right? They feel like maybe God has called them to this, but they're not sure they can do it. The modern response, almost always, is to build up the self-esteem of the individual. No, you are great. You are powerful. It's been even referred to as the self-esteem gospel, as if the reason Christ came was so that you could feel good about yourself. Right? That's the modern people really glorify self-esteem. Right? We really glorify making sure the individual feels good about themselves. But God doesn't do that here. Right? God could have, when Moses said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? God could have said, no. You are gifted. You are strong. You can do this. You're strong enough. You can handle it. You've got it under control. You're plenty on your own. What does God say instead? Verse 12. He said, I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you brought people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. His response is, I'll be with you. The response isn't, here's why you are good enough. God says, I'm enough. He doesn't say you are good enough. He says, I am good enough. And I am with you. That's his response. Now let me say this before I get on a soapbox a bit. The Bible gives you as a human exactly what you need. Okay, in that, in the first chapter, you are given the perfect self-identity. Okay, number one, you were made in the image of God, of deity, of the divine. That you were made in the image of God and therefore infinitely valuable. And by the way, Jordan Peterson, not a Christian, says it is this line on which all of society depends. Right? When we forget, as the Germans did, as the Russians did in the 21st century, when we forget that every individual is made in the image of God, hell comes. Catastrophe comes. That civilization has been based since Christ on this reality, and even the Israelites before then, that every human is made in the image of God and is therefore valuable. Okay? And in Genesis 1, you're a speck of dirt, right? And compared to an eternal God, you are the speck of dirt that He breathed life into, right? So you are infinitely lower than the eternal God, while you are infinitely valuable because of being made in His image, right? So there's the perfect, we talk about your identity, your self-esteem, there's the perfect tension that we are to live in. Every individual is valuable because you are made in God's image. And yet don't you ever forget that you are not but a speck of dust unless God does something in you. And that everything good in you, and everything meaningful, and everything profound, and everything beautiful is of God and not of you who are dirt without Him, right? And so there's this perfect identity for humanity. This is what we should always have in mind, is these two things, these tensions of your value and your absolute nothingness compared to the God who created you. A few quotes that I like. Charles Spurgeon says, self-esteem, and by the way, we almost make it something it's not, but just think about what those words are. It's to esteem yourself, right? That's the idea, which at its base is just not Christian, at least when you separate it from these things, from this tension, right? He says self-esteem naturally keeps Jesus out of the heart. The more our self-esteem increases, the more firmly we do fasten the door or lock the door against Christ. Love of self prevents love of the Savior. David Martin Lloyd-Jones simply said this, and I think this is just profoundly true, and the older I get, the more I find it's true. all of man's troubles come from his pride. All of man's trouble. How much less pain, anxiety, suffering would you face if you didn't have any pride? Goodness gracious. It's like about all of it, right? I mean, so much of my problems come because I have pride. All of man's troubles emanate from his pride. I think one more. Yeah, one more. No, two more. Spurgeon says, prepare yourselves, my younger brethren, to become weaker and weaker. Prepare yourselves for sinking lower and lower in self-esteem. Prepare yourselves for self-annihilation and pray that God will expedite the process. In large part, the Christian life is, I must become less and God must become more, to quote John the Baptist. That the goal of the Christian is not really to lift your self-esteem, it's to lift your eyes to God, to the one who made you and the one who is in you and the one who has given you exactly what you need to accomplish the task. As we've been saying in 1 John, quote from Martin Luther, you are not loved by God because you are valuable. You are valuable because you are loved by God. You are valuable because you are loved by God. Okay. So here in this passage, what we don't have is God saying, no, Moses, you're good. You're strong enough. You're great. He's saying, I am good. I am strong enough. I am great. And you have me. What else could you need? And this is the message throughout the Bible, right? Ephesians 6:10, be strong in the Lord and the strength of His might. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, right? I can do things, but only because of Christ. I can endure only because Christ has given me strength. Isaiah 41, it says, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Look at Exodus 15. Go to the right a few chapters. As soon as the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, Exodus 15. Moses and the Israelites sing a song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. And he goes on. This is after Moses, right? Moses himself held the staff, and when he held the staff, the waters parted. And Moses himself leads the Israelites between walls of water. And Moses himself calls the ocean to be closed on Pharaoh and the army of the Egyptians. This is a wonderful time for self-esteem. This is a wonderful time for Moses to say, man, I am something, right? But immediately, again, this is why God used old Moses and not young Moses. Because there's no doubt young Moses crosses that Red Sea and goes, man, I am killing it. But old Moses knows better than that. And so old Moses crosses the Red Sea and then leads Israel in a song saying, God did it. He did it. You smote Pharaoh, smoten, smited, smitten. You smooted Pharaoh.
Smited it.
So, what we see immediately, again, the need for the individual to see his need of God, which old Moses did, young Moses didn't, and that God is the one who. And I love this. This is Exodus 3, verse 11. Moses said to God, and this is not incidental, by the way. This is tied in the text. Moses said to God, "Who am I?" That's his question. Who am I? Right? That's his question. God responds. Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel, say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Verse 13. What's his name? God said to Moses, I am who I am. Say this, I am has sent you. So Moses says, who am I that I should go? And God's response literally is, I am. Who am I? Who cares? What does that have to do with anything? Who are you? You're not even part of the equation compared to the God who is. Right? So Moses says, who am I? And God says, I am. Who am I? God says, I am. I am who I am. I am has sent you. Look at, jump with me a little bit, and how consistent in these passages God is saying, I will do it. I will do it. Look at verse 10, chapter 3. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring out my people. Jump down to verse 12. But I will be with you. This will be a sign for you that I have sent you. Jump down to verse 17. I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt. Down to verse 20. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. Verse 21. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Jump down to chapter 4, verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. Jump down to verse 15. You shall speak to him, put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. Down to verse 21. That I have put in your power, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Verse 23, I will kill your firstborn son. And it goes on all the way to chapter 14 like that, where God says, I will, over and over and over throughout these chapters, all the way until they get across the Red Sea. And obviously he still says it, but there's this just consistent, I will do it, I'm going to do it, stop worrying so much, I'm doing it. I'm the one that's going to handle it. I'm the one that's going to do it. So in Exodus 3, God says, I am who I am, right? Says that the tetragrammaton, Yahweh, I am who I am has sent you, which is, the phrase is actually tenseless, right? So in English it comes out as present tense, I am. But it's actually a tenseless in Hebrew. So it can be translated, I was who I was, I am who I am, I will be who I will be, and that's of course on purpose, right? That God is the being. In fact, I think it's the Septuagint in Greek. In the first century, the Septuagint translated this, I am the being. Right? And that's the idea. I am the being. I am the foundational reality. I am that which is real. I am the thing that's at the bottom of all questions. I am who I am. I was who I was. I will be who I will be. That tenseless idea is significant. And it's important in our culture, modernly, that God is the only being who can say that, right? God said, I am who I am. God is the only being who can say that. Here's what I mean. We have this modern idea that the individual can define themselves, right? Can self-define, can say what I am. Which is the same thing that God said, right? Now, the modern idea is that the individual can say that. Every individual gets to say, I am blank. And just whatever they want it to be is what it is. And we pretend like that's reality. Like the classic one, the individual can say, I am a woman. The response throughout history would be something like, who are you to say that, right? Who are you to say you're a woman? What are you? Who are you to make such a large claim about what you are? God is the only one who can say, I am who I am. Everyone else says, I am what my Maker made me. Right? That's the response of the created thing. I am what God made me. I am what God did. That's what I am. The audacity of the modern statement of I am what I am, and who are you to say otherwise, is not only brand new, right? Where throughout all history, people wouldn't even understand that. What does that mean? It's offensive to the one who made you. It is the ultimate rebellion that you get to identify yourself instead of God has made me this and I'll respond to it even if I don't like it. God has made me this. God has made me short. God has made me whatever, right? And I'm responding to God appropriately. No. I rebel against that. I am what I say I am. There's a lot of deeper idolatry in that. Can a lump of clay say to its maker, why have you made me this way? Okay, so the rest of the chapter, he goes on to tell him to go to Egypt and all those things, that he'll be with him. There's this, in verse 19, there's this thing about the strong hand. I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. And like we talked about how there's this kind of God versus Pharaoh thing in Exodus. There's kind of the joking question there, whose hand is mightier, Pharaoh's or God's? Unless Pharaoh will be compelled by a mighty hand, and of course he will be compelled by a mighty hand, the mightiest of all hands will compel him, and that will be God himself. Little side note, it's interesting, I don't know exactly what to make of it, but it's interesting that, of course, Moses is a type of Christ, right? Moses is a foreshadowing of Jesus in all kinds of ways. Moses is the baby who escaped the demand of the king to kill all male babies. Right? That was the demand of Pharaoh. Kill all male Jewish children. Moses escapes, and he ends up redeeming and saving Israel. The same thing happens to Jesus. Right? Jesus is the baby who escapes the demand of Herod to kill all male Jewish children. That was the same command given. Right? Very, very interesting. It's the same genocidal command against all babies, and then Jesus becomes the one who, of course, escapes that, even though he was the particular target, and he becomes the Redeemer. He becomes the Savior. And I think there's this sort of metaphorical connection of we can imagine nothing worse than the genocide of young children. Right? That's the worst. That's the evil of all evils. And even there, God is capable of making good. God is capable of redemption. And we see that again there. Amidst the greatest evil, God can make good, which is what God always does. Okay, thoughts on that as we head into the next little bit? Thoughts on any of that?
I had a thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a commercial or a video. I'm kind of thinking it was in one of our parenting videos when we were teaching that. But it was a guy standing on stage, and it was talking about
Awesome. Will you grab that?
putting
Thanks.
Christ first.
Yeah.
And what he did was he brought up his Facebook, and he put more of him, less of me. And then he sat there and he refreshed it and then checked his likes.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Checked his likes over and over. And
That's good. That's good.
Nailed
Right.
it, you know.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Anything else there? Yeah, Pop.
I'm not sure if it actually applies to our lesson, but the Israelites, the Egyptians were working on hard
Yeah,
and making them make bricks
yeah.
and all this stuff. It doesn't really say, or I didn't read what they were building. I just wanted to make them build bricks.
It's definitely possible. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, we don't know. I won't talk a whole lot more, but that's one of the speculations, so that's certainly possible. And there were great things involved in in that time period. I think the Sphinx is dated to that time period pretty consistently. So it could have been the Sphinx, the lion thing. You know what I'm talking about, that thing. I think so. That may be the general view, and that the pyramids may be older than that, but we don't know that. A lot of that's just guesswork. We're doing a lot of guessing when it comes to dating those things. Yeah, that's good. Anything else? Okay, so look at chapter 4, the beginning. There's this, over and over again, we have Moses being humble, which we like, right? But here's the question. At some point, does it become almost the opposite of humility? At some point, does it become almost pride? Chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answered, "Behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say the Lord did not appear to you." Verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you've spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." And finally, God gets fed up with it. And here's what I mean by pride. Like at some point, isn't it? It's like, hey man, God has chosen you. Who are you to say otherwise? Right? Like he's been told over and over and shown that God has chosen you, and your continued refusal is a bit offensive, as if God couldn't do it through you. Right? God has chosen. Who are you to say otherwise? There's lots of lessons for us in that. God has chosen you. Who are even you to say otherwise? And Moses keeps pushing back. And finally, I love it, God, in verse 11. Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is not I the Lord? Am I not the one who made you stutter?" Or whatever it was. "Am I not the one who created you that way and who is now calling you to do it? Now therefore," verse 12, "go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." Verse 13, this is Moses. "But he said, 'Oh, my Lord, please send someone else.'" Moses says, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." What's verse 14 say? Then the anger of the Lord was kindled. Of course it was, right? And I love that we're getting the reality there, right? God gets angry at Moses. Why does he get angry at Moses? Because Moses is showing pitiful faith, and is arrogant enough to think that maybe God made the wrong choice, right? That God made the wrong choice. So God gets angry and says, "Fine, isn't your brother a Levite? Isn't your brother, can't he speak well? He can go with you. You shall speak to him, put the words in his mouth, and I'll be with your mouth, and I'll be with his mouth. Right? I just said I'll be with your mouth, but now I'll be with both your mouths. Is that enough? Can I be with both of your mouths? Is that enough for your faithfulness? It's wonderful. And while I'm there, it's an important thing to see. It's providential in that Moses is going to be the savior of Israel, right? But he's not actually capable of doing it on his own. Moses is acting as prophet, and when he adds Aaron is the priest, right? And so we have this prophet and priest who are actually going to be the ones who save Israel. That's weird. It's almost like it's pointing forward to something. Like there wouldn't be one man who would be enough to save Israel unless that one man was both prophet and priest, which of course was coming down the pipe. So we're seeing all that's rolling us forward into Christ and who Christ would be and the need for Christ. The first part of chapter 4 there is that whole section about where God gives him the ability to do miracles, right? Where he says, throw the staff on the ground and it turned into a snake. By the way, interestingly, look at verse 3. He threw it on the ground and became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. Anybody snake catchers in here? Like I know Cam is. When you catch a snake, the safest place to catch it is the head. The tail's the worst, right? And yet God says, catch it by the tail, which is, it's interesting. I don't know, steps of making a step of faith, trusting the Lord that it's going to be okay. There's potential things there, but it's interesting. He tells him to grab by the tail and not by the head. But he gives them these power to do these miracles. And the reason for it is verse 1. Moses answered, behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say the Lord did not appear to you. God didn't say, no, they'll believe. He said, okay, well, here's some reasons you'll give them to believe. And then this is, again, we talk about this a fair amount, but the Christian faith has never been a blind faith, never been a just believe faith, never been just take a leap of faith sort of thing. God's always been the kind of God that said, here's some reasons why you should believe. And he gives Moses the ability to do miracles so that the Israelites will see and believe. Remember in Mark 16, a passage that we know well for other reasons, but in verse 17 and 18, Jesus says, these signs will accompany those who believe, right? Talking about the apostles. These signs will accompany them. They will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They'll pick up serpents with their hands. They'll drink poison and it won't hurt them. They will lay their hands on the sick. They'll recover. The reason they were able to do miracles, which has always been the same, is to give credibility to the message, right? Jesus didn't even send the apostles out and say, well, just tell them and they'll believe. He said, okay, you're going to be able to do some pretty crazy things that will help them believe. God's always been a help them believe kind of God, right? The centurion says, I believe, Jesus, help me with my unbelief. God's never responded to that with, no. He's always said, okay, I will do that. He gives Moses the ability to work miracles to help them with their belief. They give the apostles, so miracles have always biblically had a purpose, and the purpose has been, well, multiple purposes, but probably the key purpose has been to give credibility to the message, to give you reason to believe. If someone comes in and says, Jesus raised from the dead, that's one thing. But if he says, Jesus raised from the dead, and then drinks poison, and picks up snakes, and speaks in languages, and all kind of stuff, we'd pay more attention to it. And so did they. Not a blind faith religion. And it's assumed there, right? Moses says, they're not going to believe me. If I just say it, they're not going to believe me. And God says, you're right. Here's some reasons that they will believe.